So, first of all, drum roll. I worked for hours on that. I hope you appreciate it. Welcome to Vulkanized. This is the third edition. I think we can now safely describe this as an annual event, Khronos event focused on Vulkan here in Cambridge at ARM. If you feel moved and you see something that really excites you, please feel free to let the real Donald Trump or anyone else who follows you. What's wrong with that?
Why is that Z?
Oh, sorry. it's not a Z, folks. It's an S. Sorry about that. Don't know how that happened. So Vulkanized is not a course. It's not a tutorial. If you need that, there's tons of them online. Judging by your forms that you filled out when you registered, most of you don't. If you do, we'd be happy to give you advice on that. What we're doing today, we have two kinds of talks. There are some which are deep dives into some gnarly corner of the Vulkan API, such as memory management, synchronization, and barriers, etc. And then we have other talks in which people who have tried to do something particularly interesting and difficult with Vulkan talk about their experience and what they set out to do, what they ended up doing, which is sometimes different, and what they learned in the process. We do have breaks and we do have lunch, but they're relatively short. The intent is, networking's great, but we have the beer festival for that. The focus here is on technical content. Everything is intended to be useful. I forgot to introduce myself, Tom Olson, work for ARM, also chair the Vulkan Working Group. And so, in consequence, I get to do the marketing fluff, which is the first presentation. And then after that, we get into the technical stuff. But it's all intended to be useful, and even the fluff has a message which I hope will be helpful to you. So we have this technical stuff. We end the day with a panel talking about where we are, always good fun. We have a hard stop at 4:30 because we need to head out for the buses. I think we'll have more to say about that after lunch, about the details of getting there. You will need to go into the big tent to get something to refresh yourself with, but please come back. We have our own private tent, and we have the infamous pub quiz with, Alon said I'm not allowed to say fabulous, merely awesome prizes.
They're not fabulous.
Right, not fabulous, no. So on with the marketing fluff. I'm going to give a very quick and very 10,000-foot view of where Vulkan is today, and then I want to talk about some of the challenges we have and what we're doing to address them and where we hope to get over the next couple of years. So starting with the target market, what is out there. 2 years ago we were in, well, we've made a lot of progress in the last couple of years. It's now the case that if you bought a computer or a graphics card in the last 18 months or so, it's pretty much guaranteed for desktop hardware to have a Vulkan driver on it. There are now not only the vendor drivers, but even open source drivers for those of you who won't use anything else, for Intel and for AMD, and those are fully conformant, tested, solid. And then the mobile vendors, all of the mobile GPU vendors, bar one, who we'll get to, are shipping Vulkan drivers. And phones and tablets are widely available, although they're generally at the mid and high end. The low end hasn't got there yet. In terms of platforms, all the open platforms, well, let's say there are some details. Windows 10 availability is excellent. All of the Linux family OSs have Vulkan shipping generally in the top level distro, although it may be a little old and you may want to update. And Android, of course, has been exposing Vulkan officially since Android 7. And there's some early adopters out there who supported it earlier than that. The big exception, of course, in terms of availability is the Apple platforms. Apple doesn't provide a native Vulkan driver, and they don't allow installing third-party drivers. So that's a challenge. We actually do have a solution of sorts in development, which I'll tell you about later. Game engines, the early adopters at launch for 1.0, you could get at least demos of Valve, Epic, and Croteam had content. In fact, Croteam had a game shipping at 1.0 launch 2 years ago. Since then, the others have been coming online. The degree of support is variable. It's generally not the default if you just run the game, but often there's a menu option to pick it. And that's one of the issues that I'll talk about a little later. Content on desktop is arriving. There's even some content. Wolfenstein 2 is the notorious example that is Vulkan only. There's a lot of great work been done by Feral, and you'll hear about their experience in the next talk, to bring a lot of interesting stuff to Linux by porting to Vulkan. And then mobile content, all kinds of interesting things happening there. Measuring developer interest is tricky. There's a reasonable number of you here. That's a great sign, but the beer is perhaps a confounding factor. So we have to tease out the influences. That's a little bit tricky. A couple of things that we track quantitatively. LunarG, who does the packaging of the Vulkan SDK, tracks weekly downloads. The signal is extremely noisy. As you can see, spikes generally correspond to the release of some interesting game. You can see Doom 3 there. But the trend, the best fit line is clearly positive. For myself, I have a number of somewhat perverse hobbies. One of them is I like to go to github.org at the top level and type Vulkan into the search box. That gives you a count and a list of all of the projects that have the word Vulkan in them somewhere on GitHub. I did that last Saturday, and the number I got was just over 2,000. And because I've had this perverse hobby for a while, I can actually plot the data. So since SIGGRAPH 2016, these are nearly equally far apart in time, although they're not carefully normalized. But you can see the trend is very clear. And based on this, I can confidently say that on an average day, GitHub adds 2.5 projects that make reference to Vulkan in some fashion. So that was the 10,000-foot view, short but sweet, I hope. I think there's a lot of really good things happening, and I would say in general, we're happy with how things are going. But we're definitely not satisfied. The reason we're not satisfied is that Vulkan is not yet living up to the ambitions we have for it. I'm going to give you my personal ambition. This is not endorsed by the working group necessarily, although I think there's a lot of sympathy for it, and I hope to make it an official statement at some point fairly soon. We want Vulkan to not be, it's fantastic that people are porting applications to Vulkan from other APIs. We want to get to where that's not necessary because you code in Vulkan from the beginning, because it's what makes sense. We want Vulkan to be the API of choice, the one that you use if you have that choice. Because, and of course this is not because you like us or because Vulkan is cool, we want you to do that because the implementations, the API is solid, it's fast, efficient, flexible, well supported, the implementations are rock solid, all of the things that you need to make that a choice. That's our goal. We're not there yet. So for the rest of the time that I have about 10 minutes, I want to talk about some of the things that stand between us and getting to that goal and what we're doing to address them. So we can start with functionality. There's various kinds of functionality gaps. The one we tend to hear about, which we don't enjoy very much, is people saying, well, this other API has this feature and you don't, so you suck. That's okay, that's fair, and of course we are interested in addressing those for the features which are usable and which developers actually need. We're not particularly interested in implementing the hood ornaments and flashy stuff that is not that useful. But there is an interesting category of very useful stuff in other APIs which we don't have, and we want to onboard those. There's also many other things which just address developer needs. So it's not all about copying other APIs. It's about what do you need to be successful to deliver your content and to address, as I said, to achieve the goals that we have. So obviously we're spec guys, so we work on this a lot, and Our latest step in terms of addressing functionality gaps is Vulkan 1.1. Came out about 2 months ago, maybe? I can't count. But it's great. Vulkan 1.1 is awesome. My favorite thing about it is that it's not very exciting. The reason it's not very exciting is that almost everything in it was already out in the form of a KHR extension. The exceptions are subgroups, which are extremely exciting and which we didn't quite get around to KHRifying. Protected memory is extremely exciting to a very select group of developers. But we have that too, and that's particularly interesting. And you should expect, going forward, this is the way we're going to operate. Core releases are not going to be exciting. The way we work is we have a list of functionality we could add to Vulkan. That list is created based on what we hear from developers, platform people, ecosystem people about what are the problems they're facing, what do they need. We devise solutions either by importing them, by taking your suggestions, or by designing from scratch. And then we prioritize, again, based on how important you tell us those various problems are. We work on those at a rate that we think is sustainable. We turn them into KHR extensions and we release them. I hasten to say, I know some people are nervous about using extensions. The quality bar that we have for KHR is exactly the same, with one tiny difference, as the quality bar we have for a core spec. We don't release a KHR if it isn't tested in the conformance test, if it doesn't have support in the validation layers, and if it doesn't have 3 implementations that are passing the conformance test. The only difference with a core spec is that we require 4 implementations. Everything else is the same. So you should feel comfortable from a quality point of view about using a KHR. They are newer, and new stuff always has some issues, but we work extremely hard to make them solid. When we decide a core release is necessary, we fold together the ones that developers are using and telling us are priorities, and we put that in the core spec. So that's our methodology going forward, and we're fairly rigorous about it. Next challenge, implementation quality. When Vulkan 1.0 released, I would describe the quality of the implementations as variable. It has gotten a lot better since, but it's still not where we want it to be. We approach improving the quality in multiple ways. The one that's really obvious, of course, is conformance test. Conformance test development for Vulkan is Khronos' single largest engineering expense by a significant margin, and the Khronos member copies spend more than Khronos does. So it's really quite a large engineering effort behind it. We're continuing to do that, of course, and in addition to simply increasing the coverage of the tests we write, we're trying to improve the quality of the kind of test that we write. So traditionally, we've written tests by reading the spec, finding all the things the spec says the implementation must do, and covering those. We're trying more and more, 2 focuses. One is improving the coverage of the shading language, because that's been a weak spot historically. You write a shader, you run it, and it does 2 different things. Even though it's legal, it does 2 different things on different implementations. So we're trying to improve language testing, and we're trying to write tests which are more like what developers do. So we don't have it yet, but we're developing tools to allow us to capture test cases which are less like the weird corner cases that we get out of the spec, and more like the code that you guys actually write. So just in terms of volume, to show you again, I should make that a little more readable, but that starts with SIGGRAPH 2016, 5 months after release. To today, we've nearly tripled the number of tests. A fair number of those, of course, are the Vulkan 1.1, the new functionality, but a great deal of it is not. It's just improved coverage in the core 1.0 functionality. Does this ever happen? You're working on an implementation, you find a bug, and you think, my God, how did this ever pass conformance? Please tell us about it. The conformance test is available to you on GitHub. You can get the whole thing. And if you want to add a test case and give us a pull request, we will take it with glad little cries. But we understand that's painful and difficult. You can just raise an issue, say, hey, I'm noticing this, implementations seem to vary. What's the state of coverage? We'll tell you. If it's covered and it's something else, we'll tell you that. But if not, it'll go into the hopper as something we need to add a test for. Next, did I skip a slide? No, this is good. Closed platforms. So we talked about Apple before. There is also the case of Unified Windows Platform, which again, Microsoft does not allow installing a native Vulkan driver on UWP Windows 10 S as it's known. So what is a Vulkan implementer or a would-be Vulkan user to do? We have a group. It's somewhat outside the main working group, but there's a group called the Portability TSG running a project called the Portability Initiative. What they're doing is developing a shim library that is small enough to ship with your game. So you link it with your game. Your game makes Vulkan calls, and the shim library translates them to Metal in the case of Apple, or hypothetically, this isn't done yet, but to DX12 in the case of UWP, which are the native APIs. We only translate the stuff that translates directly and fast. So we don't emulate, we don't impose attacks by emulating slowly some piece of functionality that the native API doesn't have. So it's a subset. It's not a conformant Vulkan implementation. The first version for Apple is done, it's shipping, it's out there. Well, it's not done, but it's available to you, and there is content that does run on it and ship on it. I have a note there, it is a work in progress. It does not pass conformance today. We are working on that. It will pass conformance for the subset that it implements. And the problem for us is to factor the conformance test so that we can isolate the stuff that that the subset provides and that Metal can support. So we'll get there, but we're not there yet. There is also a project underway sponsored by Mozilla. I should, by the way, give credit to Valve and the Brenwell Group for developing Molten VK. Brenwell developed it and Valve funded putting it into open source so that you don't have to pay a fee to use it. Mozilla is backing an effort to do the same thing for UWP. That's in a much earlier state. I haven't looked at the code, but I don't think it's particularly terribly usable at this point. And did I say, yes, Molten VK does work. Since Valve paid for it, as you would expect, Dota 2 runs on it, and they're seeing a very significant performance lift over their native OpenGL port running on Mac OS. So that's pretty impressive. Again, if you try to run something other than Dota 2 right now, you might have some interesting experiences. So there are many other similar projects. Those are the highlights, but there are other things we're aware of that need to be fixed before Vulkan becomes your API of choice. And I don't have time to talk about them. The one I do want to talk about, and this is the thing I hope you will take away from my talk, if you take nothing else, is that we need, the things that keep me awake are not the things I know about that we're working on. It's the things we don't know about. So this is where you come in. My plea to you today and anytime you're working with Vulkan is to think about what it is that stands between you and shipping successful applications on Vulkan. And not only what are the things, but what is the relative priority? Which ones are minor points of pain, major problems, blockers? We want to know about those. And you can tell us about it in any way that's convenient for you. We'll do whatever it takes. We do read Slack, Twitter, Reddit, the usual channels. Those are helpful. It's more helpful to us if you open an issue. So if it's a general issue of tooling, of compiler, language stuff, just parts not working smoothly together, because it is an open source ecosystem, all the parts are, the interfaces are a little bit loose. Please raise an issue at Vulkan Ecosystem. If it's functionality or spec clarity or something like that, raise an issue at Vulkan Docs. And you can tell us here, you can put it on the feedback form, tell us at the beer festival. We're always, always glad to hear it. So that's all I got. I think I have blown my time for questions. Sorry about that, but I want to keep us on track. So scribble down your question and ask me during the break or during lunch. And for now, if we could bring up Alex from Feral.